Chapter 5, Lecture 3. You may recall that we just finished looking at the first type of key sensory motor development, which is the types of imitation. We finished that in the previous lecture. All of these key developments are summarized for you in Table 5-3 on page 148. The second key sensory motor development that Piaget draws our attention to is object permanence. And this is a really cute thing that babies develop. They realize that something exists even when it's no longer visible. So this is how babies play peekaboo, when you cover your face and then they realize your face doesn't go away, it comes back. Or you hide a toy and they look for it in the place that they think it is, and so on. So before the age of about 8 months, children don't have object permanence. If they drop their toy and they don't see it, it's gone. Between 8 to 12 months, they do realize a toy doesn't disappear when they see it, when it's no longer visible. So they look for the toy in the last place that they saw it, even if it may not be there. So after about 1 year, they will start searching for it even in places where they did not see it hidden. So at 8 to 12 months, the researcher would hide the toy, but the child will still search for it in the place where they had last seen it, not where they saw you putting it. After a year, they will start searching in the place where they saw you hiding it. Again, Esther Tellen applied her dynamic systems theory to this idea, and she proposed that children search for hidden objects not based on what they know, but also on what they do and what they can do. Another key sensorimotor development is a capacity for symbolic development. And this includes pictorial competence, which is the ability to understand the nature of pictures. This develops around the age of 1.5 years. Even though children may have been seeing pictures and you read to them from picture books, they still don't grasp the difference exactly between a picture of the sun and the actual sun, or a picture of the moon and actual moon. But by the age of 1.5 years, they start getting it, that they'll point to the picture in the book and say, this is the sun or this is the moon. They also have scale errors which are common at this age. So a child might actually try to stuff himself into a toy car, thinking it's a real car, because they don't fully grasp that a toy or a picture is a small representation of a big real object. The reason for the scale error and the lack of the capacity to grasp the real nature of the size of objects is because of dual representation, and this is also defined for you at the margin of your textbook on page 151. Dual representation is the capacity that children under age 3 have difficulty grasping spatial relationships, because you need to keep two things in your head at the same time. You have to mentally keep in your mind the picture of or the model or the toy of the object and the real object that is represented. So the dual representation hypothesis is that children have a hard time with grasping the idea of a toy or a picture because it's difficult for them to hold two things in their mind at the same time: the actual object and the toy or the picture that it represents. Now we turn to the information processing approach. In information processing, we analyze how a complex task is broken down into steps or parts, and then how this is grasped and at what age the different abilities develop. So information processing researchers also see how infants pay attention to things that they're more interested in and for how long. So one of the concepts that they look at is habituation. Habituation is a type of learning in which when a child is repeatedly exposed to something, they pay less attention to it because they've grown habituated to it. So they stare for less long a time at a toy that they have grown accustomed to. If you present something new, they'll stare at it for longer. And that's called dishabituation. That's an increase in responsiveness after a new stimulus is presented. So we realize that these processes are based on visual processing based on sight and auditory processing based on what they hear. So in visual processing, we see infants have a novelty preference. They pay more attention to new things, and they demonstrate their ability to tell what's new compared to what is old based on what they see. So obviously infants are looking at something, remembering what's old, what they've already seen, showing that they recognize something new. This is called visual recognition memory. The speed of this kind of processing increases rapidly during the infant's first year and in the years 2 to 3 and thereafter. The same pattern is seen for auditory preference, that is, preference based on what they hear. The different senses of the child, visual, auditory, touch, and so on, may be unconnected at birth, but they begin to coordinate almost immediately. And many of you who work with children who have autism or other types of special needs may recognize a condition that occupational therapists call sensory processing disorder. And sensory processing disorder is basically that the different senses are not properly coordinating with each other, so that a child is not able to synchronize what they're seeing with what they're hearing, with what they're feeling, and then they feel overwhelmed and they start having behavioral difficulties as a result. So the ability to coordinate your senses also leads to the idea of a cross-modal transfer. That is, you use one sense to guide another sense. For example, if you enter a dark room, you first move through by feeling, and then later when the lights are on, you can see your way through the room. And the speed and coordination of information processing in infancy is a little bit associated with higher intelligence at age 4. So if your senses are well coordinated and you have an efficient information processing mechanism, then the basis for learning is well established and intelligence at a little bit older ages is better. And so this includes, again, processes such as visual reaction time, anticipation, and expectation, so that children, how fast you react, what you expect to come is coming. And again, to emphasize one more point here, the capacity for joint attention is fundamentally important in social interaction, and children who do not have joint attention, that is one of the hallmarks of children with autism. And then there are also studies that show that children who watch a lot more TV really have less joint attention, because it's different when they're listening to other people talking or interacting with other humans, because they learn how to interact with humans. So reading a book to a child or playing with them is much more beneficial for their development than having them watch even so-called educational programs on TV, because the TV doesn't give the social feedback that another person gives you. The characters are interacting among themselves, but they are not interacting with the child. So children who watch too much TV at a young age have trouble with social skills as a result. The next approach that we take up is information processing. It's a predictor of intelligence. So information processing, again, is based on categorization, which is based on perceptual issues of how things look. So children start putting things into categories, and humans are really good at categorizing information. Humans are among the best in the animal world as creatures who do a lot of pattern recognition and matching, and this is the root of much of our intellectual achievements. So the first step towards these intellectual achievements is categorization. The first example of that is based on how things look, that is perceptual. So children recognize that birds and planes both have wings and both can fly, but they also recognize conceptually that these things are a little different. So conceptual categorization is based on what things are. Chairs, tables, and sofas are all furniture items, even though they may not share many visual features. Children also learn causality in the process of information processing, that is, cause and effect. One thing causes another. You press a button, the toy lights up. Causality allows us to control and predict the world. It allows us to have social interactions. It allows us to adapt well to our environment. This starts developing at about age 6 months, as children learn to manipulate toys with their hands or feet.